So we'll start off, assuming nobody has started a Jupyter lab session or anything yet. So we'll start having gotten to Bridges 2 through the link in the collaborative notes for today, and then we'll navigate to the Jupyter lab session. We can set our number of hours. We can set it to 3, change our partition to RM shared, and we want to add the extra argument -n space 1 to make sure that we only request 1 core, because that's all we'll be needing for today. We can launch it. A sec while it sits in the queue. I see a question about why I'm using Jupyter Lab. I think it's just up to personal preference. For me, I like having, I think the Jupyter Notebook will have a window with all of the folders, and then when you open something up, it opens a new tab. I like having it all in just one tab available here. So whichever one you prefer. I'm also not sure if there's a terminal option, which we'll need. So we're going to want to navigate to our the workshop directory and open a terminal just to make sure we're up to date with the folder, and then we can run quickly git fetch, make sure everything is up to date. And then we can, we won't be able to tell if anything's changed. But if we go to Friday, we should see everything here. And we'll start with the FFS notebook. And if it doesn't pop up right away, make sure to change the kernel to the i-CoMSE CPU kernel. And we'll get started. Okay, so here we have an FFS tutorial using Langevin dynamics on simple 2D potential energy surfaces. And I will be doing the breakdown, and we can come back to the learning objectives later to make sure that you come away with this notebook with everything that we want from you. And we still have the same potential energy surfaces as yesterday to try out, and we can get started by choosing our potential energy surface. So we still have the same choice of surface. We also have, we can change the well depth. Now, the default is for PS1 and PS2. It doesn't change for 3 and 4. But if you want to try and see how the rate changes if you make the potential energy surface deeper in the wells, you can try and change that. And then we also have a variable for the position of basin B in space, which will change for mostly the 4th potential energy surface. But we can start choosing potential energy surface 1, which we have on this plot here. And then we'll get to our FFS settings and parameters. So first, there's a little bit of a different way to choose our order parameter here. This way, we can include more than just linear combinations of X and Y. We can also do quadratic and cubic dependence of each X and Y terms, just to kind of try out, see how some crazy interfaces might, or crazy order parameters would look when we're doing the sampling. So if we want linear, we would have set both OPX type and OPY type to 1. And we'll start with just the X coordinate. So our coefficient for X will be 1 and the coefficient for Y will be 0. Next, we have an option for whether we want to place our interfaces using on-the-fly interface placement, or we can use pre-selected interfaces. So we'll start off without it, but I encourage you to try out, especially with nonlinear order parameters. It would be really good to see what happens in those cases. And yeah, so if we want to define our interfaces, we need to have our interfaces defined, our basins defined as well. And then depending on whether we want to place the interfaces or not, if we do want to place them, we have some additional parameters, such as the number of configurations we want to collect from our initial basin simulation. We have a term that changes the number of exploring scouts, which is the algorithm we use to place our interfaces. How many of those we want to run to determine where to put the next interface. And we have a desired crossing probability, which you can specify to set where, how many crossings, like what fraction of crossings you want to get at the next interface. And then there's also a parameter for the minimum interface displacement. If we decide to place interfaces, but we determine it's closer to the next interface or the previous interface than we would like, we can kind of specify this minimum so it doesn't take too many interfaces to complete. And in general, we have the number of trajectories we want to run at each interface and the length of the basin simulation, and also a lag term here. We just have it set at 500 because that has worked pretty well, but there are ways to determine it, which we kind of got a glimpse of in the presentation earlier. And this basically is the time, a period of time after you collect the configuration from the basin simulation, in which no more configurations will be harvested, just to ensure that there's proper decorrelation between successive harvested configurations from the basin simulation. And finally, we have our general settings for Langevin dynamics and everything. So we'll get started. So here we've chosen OP to be X, and we have our pre-selected interfaces all plotted out here. So next, we want to equilibrate the system similar to our previous exercises, and every once in a while you'll get the case where it will reach B. It's pretty rare though. So if that happens, just run it again. And here we see we started at this point, which was specified earlier, and our red point is where it ended up with, which is nice and in the basin. So we're good with that. And then we do our basin simulations, which runs based off of the length of the basin simulation specified, and we can see the trajectory here. And next, we want to harvest the configurations from the basin, which we see as these red dots plotted nicely here. They're all along the first interface, so we know that that went well. And we also see the number of configurations that cross the first interface and the number of harvested configurations the harvested ones are, there are fewer harvested configurations because of this lag term that we've specified to ensure proper decorrelation between harvested configurations. And then we get to the bulk of the FFS simulation, where we run each of the interfaces consecutively. So here it's running our desired number of trajectories from each interface, and we plot in the red points are the configurations that are harvested at the next interface. And we plot that for each of these runs. And we let it go through. May take a few seconds for the final interface. Any questions on what's happening so far?
Hey, Naomi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I have and this may be a naive question, but is the main difference between what we're doing with forward sampling and what we did yesterday with TIS? So with TIS, you run all your simulations starting from the basin and then go whatever your starting point is, and then you're trying to find whatever you've picked as your second basin is. Whereas with this, you're picking configurations that cross each one of your interfaces. And then from that interface, you're launching and doing shooting moves to try to find the next interface, picking configurations from here, going to the next until you get to the very end and then stitch them all back together. Is exactly. That the okay, I see. Okay, nice, thank you.
So that's true for forward flux sampling. For TIS and replica exchange TIS, we are doing for every ensemble sampling on its own, like we're doing a transition path sampling for each interface in some sense, right? So we are actually generating an entire trajectory and then using that to spawn through Monte Carlo more trajectories that go between A and to the next interface, all right? And so almost one interface is quote unquote independent of the other in some way, except for knowing that if I'm at this interface, the next one is my next interface. But they don't really look at the trajectories unless you're going to do a replica exchange of those, right? So what you're really doing is in this case, you only keep moving forward, but in TIS and RETIS, you allow the trajectories to also relax back to the basin. And if they have to come back from the basin, they have that option as well. And that actually matters sometimes in sort of the efficiency with which these systems can relax. And it depends on the nature of the underlying energy landscape. Sometimes that relaxation is really needed to get to the other side of the, maybe a small barrier or something. It helps, sort of break and then reform if needed.
Right.
So yeah, so that's like the fundamental difference between doing it in this manner and then allowing that backward relaxation.
I see.
Plays a role. Yeah.
I see. Okay. So the next question that I have is a follow-up to this. So how well do the rate constants that you calculate with TIS and then what we're doing with forward flux sampling, how well do they agree with each other?
So that's something you guys should play around with and test, right? But these, some of this so if they're both making the same kind of error, then they will match wonderfully, which you'll see in your multiple channels methods. If they're simpler systems, they're both doing well, so they'll match well, actually. And that's an interesting example to explore. But in general, when you have the right sampling, they should all match up. And I'll show a small table about it in the next section where we talk about multidimensional FFS. But if they don't match, then it tells you have a problem, right? And in most realistic systems, because these are so expensive, you actually pick one method and do it. It's really hard to do both and then compare both. And so that's just a challenge. And then if rates are really sensitive to simulation differences, then it makes it even harder. So I think rates are a good thing to think about, but really the power here is in the ability to sample an ensemble of parts and then use that for mechanistic insights without putting in an external barrier, right?
Right. Okay, gotcha. Thank y'all.
Okay, so now that we've completed and we've reached configurations at the B basin, we can quickly do the rate calculation based off of our crossing probabilities and the flux through the basin simulation. And we've calculated a rate of about 7.1 to the -5th, which is of the right order, which you may have experienced in the simulations that you've done yesterday. And then next, we do a quick step to stitch together the paths that have reached the basin, the B basin, and trace them back so that we get a collection of completed paths from A to B, which we see here. And each color represents the different portions of these simulations, which came from that were part of the interface simulation, the same interface simulation. So the red is this final interface 7 simulation. All of those trajectories are these final red points, and similar for the orange and so on and so forth. And here, this, I think I added this later, but this is a quick group sizing graphic. This may not be available on the one from the GitHub, but it does show some pretty good sampling. There's a somewhat high group size from the basin at from the first interface, but the rest of them are pretty well distributed, which shows pretty good sampling. And next we can plot the path, all of the paths from each interface simulation, which we see always spans from the A basin to the next interface. And similarly, we can plot only the successful trajectories from each interface. Kind of see how those align with how we expect, and also the unsuccessful paths. And finally, we can plot out the density plots as we did in this is the results of the transition path ensemble from our FFS simulation. And we have down here, there's some exercises for you to try out, especially I encourage you to try all of them and kind of learn what the different parameters mean and how they affect the sampling. Any questions? If not, I will stop sharing and we can get divided up into breakout rooms.